Imagine holding a 400-year-old just completely crumbling manuscript in your hands.
Oh, wow. Something incredibly delicate, right?
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
you can examine every single brushstroke, every faded little note in the margin, but you aren't actually touching the fragile parchment at all.
Right, because you're probably, what, sitting on a commuter train halfway across the world.
Yeah. I mean, that is the invisible reality of the modern library right now. We always tend to visualize libraries as these, quiet, slightly dusty, physical warehouses just full of paper.
The classic environment.
Right, exactly. But today we're going to completely shatter that image because there is um, this radical overhaul happening right now in how human knowledge is processed and stored and ultimately delivered directly to you.
It really is a massive structural overhaul. And, it's happening mostly behind the scenes.
Which is why we're digging into it.
Exactly. We're looking far beyond the simple act of, like, swapping out old card catalogs for computer screens.
Right.
This is a fundamental reimagining of the underlying architecture of information itself. I mean, it changes how data is preserved, how disparate fields of research are suddenly linked together, and ultimately how that information is deployed to the end user.
And to guide us through the actual nuts and bolts of this shift, we are pulling from a really highly detailed set of source materials today.
Yes, some excellent academic work.
We have a comprehensive presentation titled Digital Transformation in Libraries, and this is specifically from a course labeled LIS Code 7107.
Right, designed by Dr. Ada Riemann.
Exactly. And based on the emblem on the source documents, this material actually originates from Al-Hind Islamic University. So it gives us a very rigorous academic foundation to really ground our analysis.
It definitely does. It's highly structured.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to dissect exactly how these traditional paper-heavy institutions are migrating into like dynamic 24/7 digital ecosystems.
Right.
And we really want to figure out what that architectural shift actually means for how you, the listener, research and interact with complex information on a daily basis.
Well, to do that effectively, we really need to be precise about our terminology first.
Make sure we're actually speaking the same language.
Exactly. Because it is very easy to just throw around a buzzword like digital and assume it applies to everything universally.
Right. Everything with a screen is digital.
Yeah. But Dr. Raymond's presentation is very deliberate here. They separate the concept of mere digitization from actual full-scale digital transformation.
They draw a really hard line there.
They do. They are
Yeah.
completely different operational concepts in this context.
Yeah, the source frames digitization as just a task, like taking a physical paper map and just scanning it to create a static PDF file.
Right. You can look at it on a screen, sure, but it's still just a flat, unchanging map.
Exactly. But digital transformation, according to the text, involves this massive process redesign. It's like, well, if digitization is the PDF, digital transformation is the equivalent of building a dynamic GPS navigation system.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. Because, a GPS integrates real-time data, it recalibrates based on traffic, and it anticipates the user's trajectory. And the presentation explicitly notes this means integrating technologies like artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and big data into literally all areas of the organization.
What's fascinating here is that to build that GPS equivalent, the sources heavily emphasize that just throwing capital at new software is not enough.
Wait, really? Because usually money solves the IT problems.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But the text mandates a massive cultural and mindset change within the organization itself.
So it's about the people.
Exactly. You have to adopt user-centered approaches, you have to promote continuous innovation, and demand data-driven decision-making at every single staffing level.
I actually want to push back on that a little bit.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Because when I was reading through the notes, the text just hammers home this idea of like cultural change and digital skill development for staff.
Right. It's a huge focus.
But from a purely engineering standpoint, if you purchase the cloud servers, you migrate the databases, and you launch the fancy mobile platform, haven't you functionally transformed the network?
I see what you're saying.
Like, why is there so much emphasis on the staff's culture? I mean, if the API works, the API works, right?
Well, upgrading your IT infrastructure without upgrading your organizational culture is like, it's like wiring your entire house for a state-of-the-art smart home system.
Okay.
But the people living there still walk down to the basement to manually flip the circuit breaker every time they want to turn on a light in the kitchen.
Oh, wow. Okay, that paints a picture.
Right. The technology is present, but the operational model is completely broken.
Because they don't know how or don't want to use it properly.
Exactly. If the library staff and the patrons don't fundamentally change their approach to how a library functions, those expensive cloud servers and big data analytics just sit there idle.
That makes a lot of sense.
True transformation requires the continuous monitoring and evaluation of user data, which the sources mention explicitly. They have to stop just guessing what resources people might want based on tradition.
Right, looking at what used to be checked out.
Yeah, and start actually analyzing the search metrics in user flow to see what the community is desperately trying to find right now.
Which requires a staff that is actually empowered to innovate.
Precisely. Not just maintain the status quo.
So the mindset shift is the actual operating system, and
Yeah.
the servers are literally just the hardware.
That's a great way to put it.
And once that operational model shifts to being beta-driven, it totally alters the physical and digital anatomy of the library.
Starting right at the core with the collections themselves.
Yeah, the sources detail this massive transition from purely print collections to these dynamic hybrid collections. We are talking about native access to ebooks, e-journals, and the integration of these massive, complex multimedia databases.
And one of the most critical structural changes in these collections is the creation of what the text calls institutional repositories.
Yes, I wanted to talk about that. Let's break down the mechanics of that for a second.
Sure.
An institutional repository isn't just like a shared network drive where people dump files, right?
No, not at all.
So if a university produces some groundbreaking research, how does the library act as both the vault and, I guess, the megaphone for that data?
Well, it acts as the vault by centralizing the intellectual output of the whole institution. We're talking theses, raw data sets, peer-reviewed papers,
Right.
and it preserves them in highly standardized digital formats.
Okay, so that's the vault part. What about the megaphone?
It acts as the megaphone by attaching really rich, standardized metadata to those files.
Ah, so making them searchable.
Exactly. It ensures interoperability with global search protocols.
Yeah.
Because of that architecture, a scholar sitting in Tokyo can instantly query and retrieve a highly specific agricultural data set generated by a researcher in Pakistan.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly powerful.
It really is. It forces the research out of those isolated, siloed university departments and pushes it right into the global open access ecosystem.
But changing the collections is really only half the equation here.
Right. You have to look at the services too.
Yeah. The services section of Dr. Raymond's presentation outlines this massive shift from manual reference to virtual reference.
Moving away from the traditional reference desk.
Exactly. We are looking at the implementation of webopacks, which are online public access catalogs alongside digital lending rights management.
And mobile apps, of course.
Right, mobile applications. And AI-based chatbots that are suddenly handling user queries and providing personalized recommendations.
Just like a commercial platform.
Yeah. And our audience is obviously familiar with AI algorithms and recommendation engines from everyday life.
Oh, definitely.
But here's where it gets really interesting. If the library is utilizing big data and cloud computing to instantly cross-reference these international databases,
Right.
and they're using AI to curate personalized reading lists, just like a modern movie streaming platform or online retailer, what actually happens to the human librarian?
Ah, the classic automation anxiety.
Yeah. Does their role just get, optimized out of existence?
That is the natural fear whenever automation enters a legacy system. But we really have to look at the mechanics of why this 24/7 cloud-based model is being implemented in the first place.
Okay, so why are they doing it if not to replace staff?
The AI and the algorithms are there to handle the baseline, repetitive navigation. They answer the immediate, really high-volume queries.
Like, where's the bathroom? Or do you have this book?
Exactly. Retrieving a specific citation, checking licensing availability, or just routing a very basic search through the web app.
Basically, it clears the traffic jam at the front desk.
Precisely. And by automating that baseline, human librarians pivot to much higher level complex terrain.
So they get an upgrade, essentially.
Yeah, the source specifically points out that services are shifting heavily toward user education, online tutorials, and virtual consultations.
Wow.
The librarian evolves into like a network manager and a digital literacy educator.
That sounds way more intense than just stamping return dates.
It is. They conduct complex Boolean search consultations for really advanced research. They manage the intense licensing negotiations for those massive international databases.
Right, dealing with the publishers?
And they teach students how to critically evaluate the absolute avalanche of peer-reviewed data the system is surfacing.
So they move from physically locating a book on a shelf to teaching the user how to navigate the entire underlying architecture of the global database.
Exactly. They become navigators.
But, I mean, implementing that level of architecture training staff to be digital educators while simultaneously running these huge cloud-based management systems, that has to require massive capital and logistical effort.
Oh, millions of dollars and countless hours.
Which naturally brings up the question of ROI. What is the return on investment that justifies putting an institution through this grueling transformation?
Well, the text outlines several core operational objectives for doing this.
Yeah.
Improving access to information and enhancing the overall user experience are kind of the baseline metrics.
Make it easier and faster for the user.
Right. And by utilizing cloud infrastructure, libraries vastly increase their operational efficiency, which, heavily supports modern, remote, and hybrid learning environments.
Which is huge right now.
Definitely. But there's a deeper, almost philosophical objective listed in the sources as well: promoting digital literacy and maintaining library relevance in the digital age.
So what does this all mean?
What do you mean?
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. When I see a phrase like maintain library relevance, it sounds a little bit like institutional panic to me.
Institutional panic. How so?
Like, is this entire massive digital overhaul just an act of pure survival? Are libraries just desperately trying to mimic commercial tech platforms so they don't become totally obsolete?
You mean in an era where everyone just defaults to a commercial search engine anyway?
Exactly. Why go to the library portal when I can just Google it?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is far more profound than simple institutional survival.
Okay, lay it on me.
Think about the underlying mechanics of a commercial search engine.
Okay.
Its algorithms are inherently designed to prioritize popularity, user engagement metrics, and heavily optimized paid advertising.
Right. Whoever pays the most gets to the top of the page.
Exactly. The architecture is built to monetize your attention, not necessarily to provide you with the most rigorously vetted academic truth.
So the search engine is optimizing for clicks, not peer-reviewed accuracy.
Yes. Libraries, conversely, are mission-driven organizations. Their underlying architecture is built to provide equitable, high-quality, verified information.
Ah, I see the difference.
When a library transforms digitally, it brings that rigorous standard of curation directly into the digital space. They are negotiating the licensing for those paywalled academic journals and making them available to you, the learner.
Without serving you ads every 5 seconds.
Exactly. They are providing the essential academic counterweight to the commercial internet.
Wow.
They aren't trying to mimic the search engine. They are trying to organize the chaos that it creates.
That is a highly memorable distinction, the academic counterweight to the commercial internet. I love that.
It's a vital role in today's informational landscape.
But, acting as that counterweight requires a pretty flawless execution of the technology.
And that is rarely the case in reality.
Right. What is acting as the friction here? Because the presentation is very upfront about the hurdles preventing every library from just reaching this optimized digital state tomorrow.
The friction is multifaceted, as you might expect. At the structural level, there is the perennial issue of limited funding.
It always comes down to the budget. Always. Building proprietary digital repositories and licensing access to international publisher-controlled databases literally costs millions of dollars annually.
And I imagine the legal side is a nightmare, too.
Oh, absolutely. You have dense copyright and digital rights management issues to navigate constantly.
Right. And the presentation also points to rapid technological changes requiring updates and the integration with existing systems.
Yeah, it's a legacy tech problem.
Anyone who works in tech knows the absolute nightmare of legacy integration.
It's never seamless.
Trying to get a 15-year-old on-premise localized database of MRRC records, which stands for machine-readable cataloging, for those who don't know.
Right.
Trying to get that to communicate securely with a modern cloud-based API without breaking all the relational links is a massive engineering headache.
It really is. It requires highly specialized talent.
And it also mentions data privacy and security, which makes perfect sense if the system is now tracking individual user queries to build those personalized AI recommendations we talked about. Yes, you have to protect that user data rigorously.
But the text also points to a couple of other things that caught my eye. resistance to change and the digital divide.
Ah, yes. This raises an important question about how we perceive access in the modern world.
Right, because we all love convenience, so why would a user resist having an entire library on their phone?
Well, when we look at a highly optimized mobile library app, it is so easy to assume everyone will just seamlessly adopt it.
Because everyone has a phone. Right.
Exactly. But assuming a universal baseline of technological fluency is a massive blind spot. This is the core of the digital divide. It isn't just about whether someone physically owns a smartphone.
What else is it about?
It is about whether they have consistent high-speed broadband to actually download massive data sets. It's about whether they possess the technical literacy to understand complex authentication portals.
Like logging in through a proxy server and all that.
Yes. Or knowing how to utilize advanced search operators and distinguish between a verified institutional repository and, say, a predatory journal that just looks legitimate.
Okay, so if a library simply flips the switch and goes entirely digital without accounting for all of that,
Yes.
they haven't actually increased access at all. They've just built a highly sophisticated wall for users who lack that baseline infrastructure or training.
That is exactly why the source is so adamant that digital transformation absolutely fails if it isn't inclusive.
Because the tech alone actually makes the inequality worse.
Yes, the technology exacerbates inequality if left unchecked. That is why staff training and robust digital literacy programs are considered non-negotiable elements of this transformation.
The staff actually has to build the bridge for the users.
The staff must actively bridge the gap. Additionally, you mentioned the resistance to change from within the staff itself.
Yeah, what do they resist?
It isn't just stubbornness. It is often a very rational anxiety about job displacement, or just the overwhelming nature of migrating to an entirely new, complex interface while you're still trying to serve the public every day.
Like changing the tires on a car while you're driving on the highway.
Exactly. It's a tremendous amount of pressure.
When you lay out the sheer scale of those hurdles, the millions required for database licensing, the absolute nightmare of legacy tech integration, and the deep socioeconomic realities of the digital divide.
It's a lot.
It seems almost insurmountable for a single local university to actually pull off.
And if they act alone, it often is.
Which is likely why Dr. Riemann's presentation moves from these theoretical challenges to a macro-level, real-world blueprint, specifically focusing on a case study in the country of Pakistan.
Yes, the Pakistan case study is vital here, because it demonstrates exactly how to bypass those local infrastructural limitations by tackling digital transformation at a national collaborative level.
So they don't just leave each university to fend for itself.
Yeah, that's it.
The primary mechanism highlighted in the source is the HEC Digital Library. HEC standing for the Higher Education Commission in Pakistan.
Right.
And the text notes this initiative provides widespread access to international databases, allowing university libraries to offer online research portals, integrate e-resources into their actual curriculum, and provide robust remote access for students and faculty across the whole country.
We really have to look at the economics of how that functions, though.
Okay, break down the economics for us.
A single university in a developing region, or frankly, even a smaller institution globally, simply does not have the budget to negotiate individual subscription licenses with massive international academic publishers.
They just can't afford the subscription fees.
No. And if they act alone, their students are physically and digitally cut off from the global research dialogue.
So the friction of funding and geography totally shuts them out.
But by pooling their resources and their negotiating power at a national commission level, the HEC creates a consortium model.
Ah, strength in numbers.
Exactly. They negotiate access to those international databases for the entire collective. They use the cloud to bypass the local lack of physical shelf space and budget constraints.
It fundamentally changes the entire architecture of access.
It really does.
Like a student logging in from a very remote campus instantly has the exact same retrieval power as someone sitting in a heavily funded institution in a major city.
Right.
Because the infrastructure is hosted in the cloud and the licensing was negotiated by the collective. That's incredible.
It perfectly resolves those core tensions of the digital divide we just discussed.
Yeah, it tackles it head on.
By deploying mobile apps for library services and collaborating with international digital libraries, The HEC model proves something really important.
What's that?
That digital transformation, when it's executed as a collaborative structural shift rather than just an isolated IT upgrade, is one of the most powerful equalizing forces in global education.
Because it democratizes the access.
Yes, it takes the accumulated wealth of human academic research and completely decouples it from physical geography.
Wow. We have covered a tremendous amount of architectural ground today.
We really have.
Let's synthesize the core takeaways from Dr. Riemann's presentation for everyone. We started by dismantling that old idea of the library as a static warehouse, establishing that true digital transformation is not just, scanning documents into PDFs.
Right, it's not just a scanner.
It is a profound process redesign that requires an organization-wide cultural shift toward data-driven, user-centric models.
And we examine how that operational shift physically changes the library too, migrating those collections to hybrid models and creating those institutional repositories that broadcast local research globally.
We saw the services evolve from manual checkouts to those API-driven web packs, AI navigation, and 24/7 virtual assistants.
Yes, changing the librarian's role entirely.
We explored the underlying motive, realizing that this massive capital investment isn't just to mimic big tech companies. It is to ensure libraries remain the rigorous academic counterweight to the commercial, engagement-driven algorithms of the open internet.
A very crucial role.
And we analyzed the friction, the grueling realities of legacy tech integration and the digital divide. And finally, how collaborative consortium models like Pakistan's HEC Digital Library use cloud infrastructure to bypass those local limitations and equalize access.
The modern library is no longer a building you visit. It is a dynamic global network that you plug into.
So as we close out this deep dive, I want you to reconsider your own relationship with your local or institutional library. How might you utilize that network differently today, knowing it is a massive, highly curated digital portal?
There's so much more there than people realize.
Exactly. What peer-reviewed databases, institutional repositories, and advanced virtual consultations you have access to right now sitting right there on your laptop that you didn't even realize were at your fingertips?
It completely changes how we view our access to information. But I actually want to leave you with one final, slightly more provocative thought to explore on your own.
Oh, I like a provocative thought.
Well, the entire trajectory of this source material points heavily toward remote access, cloud computing, and decentralized digital networks.
Right, everything moving online.
So if we project that logic forward, if a library successfully digitizes all of its rare archives, and it handles all the baseline navigation via AI, and it delivers highly complex vetted data sets instantly to your screen anywhere on Earth,
Yeah.
does the physical architectural space of the library eventually become completely obsolete? Or, once the information no longer needs a physical warehouse to live in, will we have to invent an entirely new, unforeseen purpose for that quiet communal space?